Should Nigeria's military chiefs be replaced, and on what account? Well, many Nigerians will readily agree to a change of a set of officers who have taken the blame for much of the misfortune being suffered by the nation in the war against terrorism. One of the proponents of this position is Senate Minority Leader, Senator Adeniyi Abaribe. We are now being joined from our Rise Abuja studio to have a discussion around this subject this morning with Professor Abiodun Adeniyi. Good morning, Professor Adeniyi.
Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, good morning, Doc.
Good
morning. To see you again.
Well, first, let me use this opportunity to congratulate you on your professorship. Very well deserved. We're very proud of you, indeed.
Last time we saw you, you were a doctor.
Doc,
yes.
I'm still a doctor, but an associate professor.
Yes, well, it's okay. I bet you got promoted recently. So that's what I'm congratulating you on.
Yeah.
In any case, let's go straight to
Thank
business.
you very much, Doctor. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about this bill that has been proposed by the National Assembly to make it compulsory for whoever is president to ensure that service chiefs are taken from every geopolitical zone and the principle of federal character is respected. Does it have to get to that? Do we really need a special law for the armed forces with regard to the appointment of service chiefs?
Yeah, very well, Doc. If I want to give a quick response, I would say we don't really need it. What we need is just a kind of committed leadership, a kind of national hero that will privilege the interests of the majority above the minority, that will bring about policy directions that will not make us begin to think within our ethnic or religious divides. Otherwise, out of every problem we have to necessitate one kind of law or the other. I don't think we need to get to this level where at every reluctance of a leader, to yield to public opinion, the thing we quickly think about is another law. Do not forget that at a point in our history, we were saying that we have too many commissions, too many committees, and that we need to prune them down through the Orosai report. And about 400 and something committees or commissions were recommended. We never implemented that report, and we moved on to increasing those agencies, those commissions, those committees. Now it's getting into more than 100. And again, we are still talking about commissions, committees. It will resolve one problem or the other. We don't need as many laws as it is appearing to be, because we could run into the problem of over legislation. Even the many laws we have, what is the question? To what extent have we really implemented them? To what extent have we really executed them? I think what we need to be calling for really is a national hero, a national leader that will rise above peccadillos, predilections, and that will not be found with any kind of definite idiosyncrasy, which is inimical to the plural entity called Nigeria. In the past, we have gone close to having this national hero. Murtala Mohammed was close to it. Moshood Abiola would have been close to it. Obasanjo was also close to it, but he was let down by fourth term. I think perhaps after Buhari leaves in 2023, we'll be able to assess him if he has actually made the cut. But it's also, the time is right now for us to begin to guide him so that he can probably make the cut in the near future. I don't think every problem, every reluctance, yes, I understand where the senator is coming from, because the president seemed to be reluctant to change the service chief 5 years after, in a situation where many of their...
Sorry to interrupt you. We'll just take a quick short break, and then when we return, the conversation will continue. Please stay with us.
Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. We're still with our Arise Abuja studio, and our guest there, Dr. Abiodun Adeniyi, talking about the proposed Armed Forces Establishment Bill, Armed Forces Service Commission Establishment Bill, sponsored by Senator Abaribe. And just before the break, Dr. Adeniyi, you were talking about how we just have way too many commissions. And now this bill seeks to establish yet another one. The board alone, according to this bill, or this proposal, has 24 members. This is without adding the staff that will obviously have to work under this board, which is also to buttress your point. Now, the issue of the Character Commission and the fact that that board lapsed in 2018 and is currently being run by a sole administrator, the acting chairman, and he urged the president to reconstitute that board. That was not done, which I suppose is part of what has given rise to this proposal of his. The fact that a constitutionally established board is allowed to lapse in this fashion is quite disturbing, because the FCC is established by the Constitution, Senate Section 153. What are your thoughts on that? The way we pay lip service to the Constitution?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that was actually what I was trying to say, that most of the time the problem is not about us coming up with one kind of law or one kind of legislative proposal or the other. The problem is actually the failure or the lethargy of our leaders, to do what is right, and if we're saying this, we're not saying all of them are actually guilty, but the majority of them have this problem. If they've been very, very responsible, if they've been very precise and very predictable in accordance with rules and regulations, we will not be having proposals like these, that seems to speak to deficiencies on the part of the leaders. And I'm afraid we cannot be a nation of laws, because we amount to over legislation, like I said earlier. And of course, these laws are not actually cheap to implement, because you need a commission, you need a committee, you need structures, you need personnel, except we're saying that we just want to be setting them up to fend for the boys or to satisfy some interest. But I don't think that any nation can progress, through that strategy. I think it's just a matter of us being more conscientious on the part of our leaders, being more conscientious and being more responsive to their obligations. That's just what we need, really. And I was saying that we may not ordinarily, or again, want to blame the senator for coming up with this proposal. Sometimes we can also say that laws come out because of changing circumstances or realities that snowball in the course of time. And perhaps he thinks that this is probably a solution to what amounts to the reluctance of the president to change the service chiefs 5 years after, in a situation where we think, rightly or wrongly, that if the service chiefs have been changed, it will bring about new perspective to the impregnable fight with Boko Haram. Well, good thinking, but again, we have to look at it beyond that level. Perhaps what we need to do is to rein in on Mr. President. Yes, sir, you've done a good job. We elected you because we thought you could fight Boko Haram, but now you cannot fight Boko Haram using the system alone. You also need personnel. Now, the personnel you have in place, sir, they have stayed more than 5 years. We're not saying they have done badly, but we think that we need some other personnel so that we can have new thinking, new ideas, especially in a situation where their juniors are being retired and they are prevented from getting to the height of their profession, because we've had some other ones staying longer than it ordinarily should have been to do.
Certainly, and I guess also Senator Abaribe's concerns started also when there were allegations of job racketeering within the FCC and the sale of jobs going for about 3 million naira, and that's where it all started. But you mentioned that it's not about creating new laws all of the time, that at the end of the day we actually have too many, and that shouldn't always be the response. But in situations where the legislative feel like maybe they aren't being heard by the executive, what other options do they have to really push for that response that they want to get?
Well, the legislature, they have different strategy that they can use in getting things done. It's not just about regulations or coming up with new laws like we have agreed, sort of. What about lobbying? What about, some kind of diplomacy? What about other forms of pressure tactics? The executive may come in with some bills, they may come in with some requests, not necessarily asking them to be blackmailing, but they can, stand down some of those requests until they get the executive to do their own thing, really. You see, it's not just about thinking that we could solve problems with a new code, you know, or with a new review of the constitution or some kind of laws. Of course, we know nations around the world that don't have constitution, you know, unwritten as they are, as they were, but these nations are functioning very well, you know. So it's largely about understanding. It's about, you know, subscription to the greater goal of nation building through the prism of patriotism and nationalism, which is largely lacking on our part because our subscription so far is through is just to our cleavages, you know, and that's why we are saying that until probably have a national hero that will rise above those cleavages, we'll continue to bother about these little things, you know, about federal character, quota system, and such other things. And again, we'll begin to distract ourselves, you know, with endless initiative around miniature laws like this one that is probably coming up. Again, we'll concede to the senator. He has a right. You know, he's representing his people and he's coming through his own thinking, which I want to believe that is very, very original. You know, but I guess my problem this time is that we cannot have some of these laws because they are becoming too many, you know, and too distracting. You know, and I don't know how far we'll go. There's another one the other day asking for the rehabilitation of ex-Boko Haram, another commission. For God's sake, we shouldn't be a nation of commission, a nation of committees. Already we have many agencies that are in a very good position to carry out many of these assignments if they are strengthened, if they are encouraged. And of course, we know that many of them have very competent people as well. The important thing is just to encourage them and not to continue with the business of duplication later.
Well, let's even interrogate the principle of federal character. When it was introduced, the whole idea was to allow opportunities for every citizen, regardless of where they come from. But many Nigerians are also of the view that that principle, the whole idea of it, in fact, has been abused, you know, to the disadvantage of many Nigerians. Shouldn't we, some people ask, in fact, amend the relevant section of the Constitution on federal character, Section 14, subsection 3, and other sections in that Constitution, to allow for a situation in Nigeria whereby people get opportunities based strictly on merit? What do you think of that argument? Don't you think there should be a moratorium, you know, on the whole idea of a federal character, and people should just develop on the basis of their own ability and not where they come from?
Yeah, Doc, very good question. But I'm afraid it's going to be very difficult in a nation like ours where our difference, as a student of difference, where our difference is still very, very fragile. You know, we're still managing to control ourselves. And for instance, you can put all the facilities, all the physical facilities and infrastructure in our country, in our kind of country, in a particular region. If you do not give them through a sense of belonging, you know, by having them represented at the center, they will still complain of marginalization. That's the nature of our country, where structures are still very weak, you know, and we have to be we have to be finicky in managing our difference, in managing our variegation. That's what a kind of a country like ours requires, really. We're very homogeneous, but not to say that we are the only homogeneous country around the world. Even the almighty United States is very homogeneous. It's a conflation of different ethnicities as an immigrant society. But you see, because of strong structures, strong institutions, they've been able to manage their differences very well to a very large extent. But in our own case, we are still struggling with development. You know, our development, you know, material prosperity in this country is weaved around how close you are to state structures. You know, you can only become suddenly stupendously wealthy if only you have access to national resources. And it does not really matter whether your area has physical development. So you need some kind of a sense of belonging through involvement in national governance. That's the problem with our whole situation. You know, but the argument here is that if you do not have a kind of process, a kind of protocol that requires you to involve different sections, you know, you continue to have endless agitation, irrespective of what you think you want to do for those areas in terms of physical development and all of that. So the framers of the Constitution were not really wrong in 1979 when they included it in our Constitution, you know, coming as a development or as a greater part of the quota system that operated from the colonial period. It's okay for us to continue to have it, but again, how religious our leaders in terms of the implementation. The problem we're having now is
Dr.
that
Adeniyi,
there's
on that
lack of implementation.
On that note, Dr. Adeniyi, we'll take another short commercial break, and after that break, we'll come back to you. Please stay with us.
Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. We're still with Dr. Abiodun Adeniyi from our Arise Abuja studios. Dr. Adeniyi, you've said earlier about how laws have to evolve as, the lapses that they're seeking to cure become evident because they're not always immediately apparent. It's due to unforeseen circumstances that these reforms happen. It wasn't envisaged, I'm sure, that would have these long-serving service chiefs. So let's take a look at what the bill is actually seeking to cure, the defect it's seeking to cure, whether or not we agree with the fact that we don't need to buttress the Constitution. The field has already been covered. What is the bill trying to communicate, especially when you look at the steep penalty in the bill? It says that a president who allows service chiefs to overstay their mandate and to not observe the principle of federal character is liable to a jail term of 1 year at the expiration of his tenure as president. So this is quite a harsh sentence being envisaged by this bill. So that goes to show that there's some deep resistance to this particular issue in society. Whether or not the bill sails through, what should the response of the executive be? Let me put it more bluntly. What should the response of President Muhammadu Buhari be? Especially because this bill is not to be taken in isolation. This bill is just one of the many voices clamoring for the removal of these service chiefs.
Absolutely. Tutu, very loaded question. But I think one thing that the bill wants to do is to reduce the power of prerogative on the part of the president, who is responsible for appointing, who is solely responsible for appointing these service chiefs. If his power, to exercise that prerogative is reduced, then of course he will be bound by the law, by the regulations or prescriptions of the commission. That's the first thing I think the bill wants to do. And secondly, if the president, of course we know that the president will respond, in the negative, but again, they need to take a cue from this because it's a kind of response as well to their seeming reluctance to listen to public opinion. Although public opinion is not always right in the perception of a leader who has his own mindset, and most of the time the majority may always be wrong. The onus of a good leader is not to be sentimental, not to be emotional, to have his ground, and at some point in the future he might be justified. But in the circumstance, sometimes, you have to also be diplomatic. You can play to the gallery for the sake of populism, and I think that's what the president should have done in the circumstance. We can see some facts, some evidence to support our clamor that it was time that the service chiefs are properly replaced, not because we have anything personal against them, but we just think that we need new perspective, in the fight. We are in a war situation, because these guys keep striking, and it is 11 years now, and the onus is on us to continue to look for solution. And if the solution is beyond the system, if it's around change of personnel, why not? In corporate world, we know that when there are crises and a set of personnel are in charge, they are quickly replaced so that we have new perspective, new thinking, new initiative. And of course, it's not different from managing political administration, not even military affairs as well. The military is supposed to be a professional group, very professional, respectable, noble group, even from history. And we do know that this is not a section that requires so much politicization. It's about professionalism, good thinking, to be able to deal with major crises like the one we have at hand. The service chiefs have tried, they have paid their dues, but again, we have to urge the president, to once more, or maybe for once, listen to public opinion. It won't cost him anything and probably replace the respected service chief, not just because we need fresh perspective, but because we need other ones coming behind to also have a bite of the cherry, if I'm going to put it like that.
Thank you very much, Doctor. And speaking of public opinion, let me also bring you up on a bill that has its public hearing today in the Senate, the Protection from Internet Falsehood and Manipulation Bill, also known as the Social Media Bill, is going up for public hearing today. And one group in particular, Afenifere, have kicked against it, saying that they are not going to be attending the hearing. Now, in quotes, Yinka Odumakin, the spokesperson, said, "It is nauseating that those who are furthering the agenda of terrorists by considering a bill to create an agency for terrorists would want to criminalize speech for those who only have their tongues as a weapon." What is your take on this, them not attending the public hearing too, and how the public hearing is going to go, in your opinion?
Yeah, thank you, Leila. If I want to give a very quick answer, I would just say that the bill is simply full of sound and fury, and it's not going to go anywhere. It's going to signify nothing at the end of the day, because it's just a matter of an individual opinion on the part of a senator, and I don't see it going beyond the second reading, obviously, because public opinion is not just against it, but because we have also made the point that the question of fake news, hate news, cannot just be solved again with another set of legislation. We have laws that are in place that can deal with these things, and of course, fake news is not new to us. Hate speech is not new to us. It is coming to the fore again because we have a revolution in communications technology. And we know that in this kind of revolution, there are individuals who are nymphomaniacs, like Dr. Abati once wrote in his column. We have closet nymphomaniacs everywhere, and of course, Professor Wole Soyinka also referred them as closet psychopaths. That's the nature of society. That's the nature of innovation. It comes up with different dimensions, different challenges. But what we need to do is not another legislation, but in the circumstance, we need media literacy. Media literacy to educate the people. Western societies are spending billions educating the people on this new development in communication. And we shouldn't think that it's a part that we shouldn't toe as well. We need to toe this part, and not continue with legislation, because it is a historical thing for us that fake news, hate news has always been with us. From the time of the King of Prussia up to the time of even Julius Caesar. Today there are questions around whether or not Julius Caesar wrote those literature that we attribute to him. So does it mean that Julius Caesar was fake? But the question is not to condemn Julius Caesar, but to examine the issues around it and perhaps come to a synthesis on what the situation actually is. What was the problem between the North and the West and the East in the period of the bipolar war? Ideological war, but of course they resolved it through the population of the knowledge space with knowledge, with information. So if we want to deal with fake news or hate speech, it's not about laws, but it's about more information, more communication, on the part of those who probably feel offended, and more importantly, media literacy, a new form of education, so that we'll have a new form of awareness, a new form of conscientization, and people can be directed appropriately. Leila.
Well, Dr. Adeniyi, I think the question that needs to be addressed is this. Do you think that some form of regulation will be required to prevent people from using technology, which is now in everybody's hands, to either discredit people or to spread false information? And if you believe in the idea of regulation, what form should that regulation take?
Yeah, thank you, Doc. I actually make the point that we already have laws. We have the law of libel, we have the law of slander, and even if we say that it's already outdated, we have the law of sedition. And most of these laws can be activated. These laws are not just related to matters that are offline, they are equally applicable to matters that are online, But in the case of online matters, you may have the crisis of jurisprudence, but it can also be dealt with through international laws. The Interpol is there, there's cooperation among nations, there are multilateral arrangements that will ensure that if somebody commits an offense in the US in a particular country, you can apply for extradition if you think that you have justifiable ground to so do. So laws are there. How, to what extent have they really been activated? You know, how many people, I can't remember, have been tried in the last couple of years for libel? How many people have been charged in the last couple of years for slander? Or so to say, you know. Yes, we see them there, but we are probably reluctant, probably scared of activating them. And the next moment we want to think about, the next thing we want to think about is another set of laws. I don't think we can run like that. First of all, we don't even have the funds to administer these laws, to administer this commission, you know, and we want to, you know, create further problems for ourselves. You know, we're going to have a rethink. It's good for us to have the public hearing today. We all probably will be there. It's very interesting to ideate around it, to intellectualize around it. Probably we'll have a better understanding of what the sponsors are saying, you know, but I don't think this Senate of 109 noblemen, you know, will accede to that request, because at the end of the day, you know, it's going to be a load that will be too much for us to carry. And this is not the time we need so much load, because we're a broke country, we're indebted, you know. We need more things done rather than over legislation, Dr. Abati.
Indeed. I wanted to raise another issue with you about ASU. We discussed that this morning while we were going through the news headlines. ASU is threatening a strike based on this whole IPIS situation, which we've discussed with you before. But just to recap, this was raised since October. ASU is refusing to sign on to the IPIS platform, saying that it undermines the autonomy of university and pointing to inefficiencies, corruption, and what have you within the IPIS system. Now, 57% of ASU members have registered on the IPIS platform, but even they did not get their last salaries. So now ASU is now threatening a strike. What side of the divide do you stand on? Because even ASU is divided since some of their members enrolled on the platform.
Okay, so first of all, I'm not a member of ASU. I work in a private university, but largely we are also colleagues because we interact, we meet at conferences, workshops, etc., etc. You know, I sympathize with the controversy going on with ASU, you know, but I don't think perennial strike, a resort to another strike, is actually a solution. You know, sometimes it is good to be patient, to explore all diplomatic channels before final conclusion is made. You know, what we can just do really in the circumstance is for ASU, I think, to really have a rethink and maybe concede this time, because we're talking about a system, a technology deployed to curb corruption, deployed to bring about transparency and accountability. And if it has worked with other government agencies, I see no reason why it won't work with ASU. So ASU should probably forget this rhetoric posturing, with every due respect, and for once concede their ground, you know, agree with the government, especially in a situation where many of them are already enrolled on IPs. You know, that's what I think really in the circumstance, so that we don't have this continuous strike. It's affecting our educational system, lowering our reputation, and it's also not good for the future of this country, because we're supposed to be molding students, you know, graduates, that will influence our future. But if the way we mold them is half-hearted, if it is mediocre because of perennial endless strikes, you know, I don't think it's going to be good for us to do.
Certainly, but ASU are also saying that even those who are enrolled on the IPIS system haven't received their pay. So what does this also say?
Well, Leila, I think it's just perhaps a matter of time before government perfects it. You know, I want to believe that if they have not received their pay, it can still be perfected, really. You know, sometimes this technology can fail us, especially in a developing country like ours, where we see our problems of power and where teething problems attend our bids to introduce this technology. So it could be one of those things. I don't think it's a problem that should continue, really. The fact that they've not been able to get their salary, even people who are not on IPs, how many of them are getting salaries in public establishments? So these are problems that could be that we can describe as teething, and that we'll see petering out over time. You know, it's a matter of understanding. Like I said, you know, I don't think that resort to strike is a reasonable solution all of the time. You know, there could be other channels. You know, The problem actually wasn't monocultural, and so why would solution be only unilinear? You know, why would it just be unilinear? You know, strike. You know, let's down tools. That's the solution to the problem. I don't think that's the path to go, really. There are multiple channels that we can explore. You know, diplomacy is there, appealing is there.
Dr.
Yes,
Adeniyi, if I may just add a footnote, without necessarily acting as a spokesperson for ASU. The university teachers are also saying that, look, this is even not just about IPIS. It is also about the Memorandum of Understanding that government signed with ASU in 2009. And our government has not implemented that agreement. And it's all about standards, about, you know, other issues within the system. But thank you very much, Dr. Adeniyi. Thank you.